Okay, we are glad to welcome once again. First of all, say hello to John King.
Hey, good morning, Peter. We have Mirdad in studio. He's got a bevy of guests, but before we get too far,
Okay.
I promised
Bulletin, this just in.
I promised Sue, one of our faithful listeners, that we would give a quick notice. So Sue and the Orrs, they lost their dog Murphy this morning.
Now, they just moved a little while ago.
Yeah, so their dog is missing. It was, and here should be easy to remember, by McDonald's on McDonald Street.
Okay, got it.
All right. So between the double arches, hopefully we'll be able to find Murphy. Murphy is a white and brown Springer Spaniel. If you find Murphy, please call Sue at 546-9545. That's 546-9545.
I'm leaving right now to go look for the dog. So you guys, you guys go. That's how much our listeners mean to us. So. Anyway. So we certainly hope that the dog is found soon. All right, so we have guests in studio, but first we start by saying hello again to one of our favorite guests, Dr. Mirdad Kia, University of Montana. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much, Peter. Good morning to all your listeners, and thank you, John and Peter, for facilitating this wonderful program. Today, we have two outstanding guests with us, and one of them is my old colleague and friend. He's not old, I'm old, but we have known each other for a long time. My very dear colleague, Jamil Chaudhry, who is a very distinguished architect at the University of Montana. And then we have another outstanding guest, an outstanding friend, Brendan Work, who is today, at the present, is our Arabic instructor for the entire Missoula County, basically, public school system. And I will ask both of them to introduce themselves a little bit, talk about who they are, where they are coming from, but also to talk a little bit about what they are doing with regard to the Muslim community in Missoula. I know a lot of people are curious, a lot of people have questions. And, of course, with the issue of refugees perhaps coming from some of the Middle Eastern countries, some of their work is related to that as well. So with no further ado, let me ask Jamil to start, and then we go to Brendan.
Okay, Jamil, go ahead. You talk right into the microphone there, sir.
Thank you, Mirdad. Thank you, fellow listeners. So my name is Jamil Chaudhry. I'm working currently as the campus architect at the University of Montana. A few days ago was my 21st anniversary of being in Missoula, so 21 years in this valley and still going strong. So. And loving every day of being in this wonderful valley. I was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya. So even though I look Indian Pakistani, which ethnically I am, I always get asked, well, you could not be from Africa. You're not black. You're not African. So I get that a lot, but.
As if you're not allowed to be.
It's kind of as if you're not allowed to be a Muslim in America, right?
Exactly. Yeah, really. So go ahead. Yeah. So you're breaking down all the rules, man.
Breaking down all of the rules. Okay. Yes, I'm a one-man United Nations.
Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, I've been in the U.S. since 1995. So I've been half my life overseas and half my life in the U.S. So I have a lot of perspective. First 5 years, I was in the state of Texas, living in Bryan College Station, which is probably the most conservative town, I would say, in the state of Texas.
Which is saying a lot for Texas.
It is, which is saying a lot. I mean, surrounded a lot by Rush Limbaugh talk radio and stuff like that. So I'm quite used to listening in and arguing with a whole bunch of folks about the content.
That's great. All right.
So,
well, you'll be right at home here.
I'll be right at home here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, welcome, Jamil. It's good to meet you. Okay, Brandon, what do you got?
Well, I'm Brendan Work. Assalamu alaikum to everybody listening. And pleasure to be here.
It's just a hot mic. Go ahead.
The voice of the greatest is the voice of my childhood.
Oh,
I grew up here.
Thank you very much.
Local boy. And now I teach Arabic in all three of the public high schools in Missoula. Been doing that for 5 years. And let's see. It is.
So I would like, forgive me for jumping in here, but how in the world did you get interested in Arabic? And since you're a Missoula kid, and not only speaking it but teaching it.
The true story is that it was a competition between my sister and I.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of great stories begin that way. My sister is just miles and miles smarter than me, and she decided to study Arabic when we both.
And here's that $5 I owe you, sis. Yeah.
That's what I'm telling you. That starts many good stories.
Yeah.
Anyway, she started learning Arabic. I said I can do it too. She quit after 2 years, and I kept going. And now I'm on year 11, and I've been teaching for 5 years. And it was the best place sibling rivalries ever taken me.
So what is the reaction in the high schools with you teaching Arabic? First of all, I got to ask you, have any of the parents called up and said, I don't want my child learning Arabic?
Not directly to me,
Really?
no.
Okay.
And I've never had anything but positive reactions from parents in parent-teacher conferences or over email. Parents are really curious to know what the language of Arabic sounds like.
Okay.
They want their kids to speak it as soon as they get home, even if it's the first day. They want them to write their names and write the dog's name and write the street name and everything.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful thing. I've only gotten positive reactions from parents.
Okay, great.
We're taking our first ever trip this year. We're going to Morocco.
Really?
In
How many
March,
kids are going with you?
Just 8.
8
It's
kids.
a small trip, which is okay with me. I don't mind.
Yeah.
A small
So
trip.
go ahead, Mirdad. Grab the mic.
Yeah, sure. Well, I learned in Swarthmore College in Philadelphia, so I went abroad. I went out of state for college and picked up Arabic there. But we do have a great Arabic program here at the university. And when I was in high school, we didn't have the program I'm teaching in, but I'm very, very grateful. All these kids can take advantage of it now.
Well, when I was in high school, back when we were chipping out turn papers in stone, it was a long, involved process. We had to use the ribbon and everything.
Yeah.
But it's hard to correct in stone. But anyway, we had German and Spanish. That was it. And so if you wanted to learn something else, you were really on your own.
So the language offerings, they depend on this, the state of the world and everything. But you look at the languages that are biggest in the world today, and Chinese is biggest by a long shot. So if any high school doesn't have a Chinese program or an Arabic program, of course I got to rep my own language here. It's number 4.
Is there a Chinese program in the public schools?
Mm-hmm.
There is.
In all
Okay.
3 of the public schools. 2 of them, Hellgate and Sentinel. They
Okay.
have a Chinese
All
program.
right. Go ahead, John.
Well, we're almost up to our first break. But when we get back, obviously, you grew up here in Missoula. Jamil, you've been here for, 21 years? 21 years.
In Missoula, but 26 altogether.
26 years in America, 21 years in Missoula. And before you were in Missoula, you were in apparently the Lone Star City of the Lone Star State in Texas. So you got a tenor of what America is like. I guess my question for both of you when we get back from the break is, this election and some of the themes of the election when it comes to the Arabic-speaking world, specifically the deal with terrorism and Islam and the relationship between the Muslim religion and American politics seems to be very on a razor's edge right now. I was hoping if you could comment on if you've noticed any changes in the tenor of America in the last 2.5 years during this campaign over this issue.
We're going to come right back and hope you'll join us. Stay with us. We have Dr. Mirdad Kia joining us in studio. Jamil Chaudhry, U of N, University of Montana architect. Brendan Work, Arabic instructor at the Missoula High Schools. We're going to come right back. By the way, all of our lines are open. We would love to have your phone calls, your opinions, one way or the other. That's what this show is all about. You guys make it rich. 721-1290 is our number. We'll be right back. We are back. On Talkback, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Dr. Mirdad Kia joining us in studio, along with Jamil Chaudhry, who is Jamal Chaudhry, the University of Montana architect, and Brendan Work, Arabic instructor at our local high schools. Now, you just asked a question before the break, John. So the issue of being a Muslim American, I imagine, has changed quite a bit, especially in the last 3 years. Ever since 9/11, okay, it's been an issue. It's been a different in tenor in the United States. But recently, with all of these ISIS attacks all over the world, with bombings and shootings, and a couple of attacks here at home as well, a lot of Americans are really worried and scared, and it's seeped into our politics in a big way. I wouldn't say seeped. It's kind of the leading sentence in many political discussions these days. So I guess I was hoping I could get a kind of a take from you on how you deal with that, and where do you think America is going with this topic? well, let's get Jamil on first. Go ahead, Jamil.
Great question. I mean, being here about 26, 27 years, I've got a good kind of perspective of where American Muslim relations have been. When I first came here, the U.S. was going into Kuwait, into I believe what they called it was Desert Shield. First it was
The Desert Storm and then Desert Shield, right?
Desert Shield first, and then Desert Storm. Yeah,
Okay,
the
yeah.
Shield was first to go ahead and protect Kuwait and, kind of protect Saudi Arabia from further invasion, and then the Storm was to go ahead and actually liberate Kuwait. So, that kind of was already my first take on the U.S. It was, what kind of relationships are there. And it seems to me like there's always been a kind of an anti-Arab base or some kind of sentiment here for a long, long time.
Well, if you remember way back in
Yeah.
the 70s,
Mhm.
when the Ayatollah,
The Ayatollah,
took
yeah, yeah.
like those
Yeah, yeah.
hostages,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's 444
Mhm.
days or whatever, just
Yes.
before Reagan came into
Mhm.
office, and that kind of raised
That
tensions.
raised the tension,
So,
yeah. So at that time, it seemed to me as if it was anti-Iranian, and then, of course, with the Kuwait invasion, it was anti-Arab. But I never really got the feeling that it was anti-Islam. It was it was against a region that we were fighting against, or that there seemed to be perceived tensions against. But it
Well,
just seems
that's
that since
normal.
9/11,
Yeah.
it changed towards an anti-Islam.
Sure.
And
Now,
even,
what do you
and
think
even
was the
after,
driving force
and
behind
even
that?
after that, it seems as if the attacks on the Muslims here was kind of scattered and not so huge. Personally, I didn't feel as much threatened. But lately, since this election cycle, things have taken on a very, very different tone, an extremely different tone.
So you say it's darker now?
It's much darker, it's much more sinister, it's also much more well organized. So this is almost like an anti-Muslim smear campaign that is being fueled. I mean, there's websites, there's YouTube videos out there, there's people going out on talk tours, and they're really sowing seeds of anti-Islam. It's based upon lies, all kinds of innuendo. I mean, there's very little fact, but it's based on all of this fear that is being thrown out there in order to kind of excite a base for political gain.
Now, how much of that has to do with ISIS? Because when you look at the barbarity that is portrayed in some of the things that happened with ISIS, and people would attach that to all Muslims all over the world who obviously believe all this.
Yeah, but it started off, I would say, before that.
Okay.
It started off with the whole Al-Qaeda movement. So the Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, I mean, that started creating a whole bunch of anti-Islamic furor, and, justifiably so. But there's also, and then as a result of that, as Al-Qaeda's kind of been killed off or, defeated for the most part, I wouldn't say 100%, but for the most part, ISIS has kind of taken over that mantle of what Al-Qaeda stood for. But I would ask the listeners to remember that whatever Al-Qaeda has done and ISIS has done to non-Westerners, it's done probably 1,000 times worse to fellow Muslims. And that's not something that the Western press or media wants to talk very much about, but we in the Islamic world see that. They've destroyed mosques, they've destroyed tombs, they've killed fellow Muslims, all in a kind of a mafia-style fear and intimidation format.
Could you explain, forgive me for dominating the conversation here with you, Jamil, but could you explain why ISIS is doing that to their own fellow Muslims? Because a lot of folks just don't understand that.
Fear and intimidation. If you can rule kind of mafia style, you can control a whole bigger population with very few people. Using your propaganda, using your guns and fear, you can control a whole city. You can control half a country just through fear. And then you can use the internet, you can use the radio waves, you can use TV, YouTube, whatever, to sow your propaganda and encourage young recruits to come follow you.
Go
And
ahead,
of course,
Dan.
one part of the equation that, building on what Jamil was saying, that in the Islamic world, there's quite a bit of talk about that.
Yeah.
But we don't hear about it in the Western press, is that the biggest sponsor of ISIS is actually Saudi Arabia and a few very
Some of the
rich
Gulf states.
Persian Gulf states like Qatar and United Arab Emirates. And of course, they're the closest allies of United States, and much of the money that the Saudis use to support ISIS is from sale of its oil to U.S. oil companies. So the joke in the Islamic world is that the money actually originates from United States, goes through the Saudis. The Saudis put all this money for ISIS. I mean, when you think about it, these terrorists, having tanks and brand new cars and brand new weapons and so on and so on, where did they buy it and with what money? Always follow the money. And when you follow the money, it ends up in rich Gulf states, and those rich Gulf states have some kind of an interesting, disturbing relationship with their principal ally in the West, which is United States. So in the Islamic world some people have suggested that Western press and Western governments have to look at their relationship with some of their so-called Arab allies before they start blaming the Muslims.
Okay, and with that, we're going to take a break. Brandon, I know you want to visit. We have 4 lines open. This is an interesting conversation, and we're just getting started, folks. So 721-1290, you're also welcome to make your comments known on our Facebook page, and we'll pass that along to our guests. So give us a call. We'd love to know what you think here on Talkback. Hey, we're back. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Remind me someday to tell you about the tale of the Bubba mug. But okay, now, Brendan, you were about to say something. So
yeah, happily. I just wanted to put a little positive spin on it, if I could. There is a lot of increased interest in the Arab world and in Islam as a religion, and it can take a positive form if people take a humble approach to it and want to ask Muslims about their religion or want to learn Arabic or want to travel to the Arab world. It can also take the unfortunate kind of manifestation of people who are instant experts on Islam or instant experts on the Arab world or the Middle East. And this happens, unfortunately, a lot in this issue. People, if they don't take the time to speak to native speakers or speak to Muslims and get their perspective, they can often say, well, I learned about Sharia. I read it in a book called Sharia. And that's just unfortunate because that topic is so complex and it takes so many years to study that, the conversation can often be between people who have, spent the time in the Arab world or in the Middle East and done their study, and people who have, looked it up on the internet.
I also want to sort of add this, just based on what Brendan just said. When we are talking about Islam, quite frequently we talk about the Arab world, which is an important part of the Islamic world. But the Islamic world is far more diverse than just the Arab world. It extends all the way from Indonesia, which is the largest Islamic country, to the suburbs of Los Angeles. I mean, Muslims are everywhere. Those who speak Arabic are Arabs. That's the definition of an Arab, those who speak Arabic. But the majority of Muslims, in fact, don't speak Arabic. So from Turks to Persians to Pakistanis to Indians to Indonesians to Malaysians, they're Muslims, but they're not Arabs. So to understand the diversity of this world is very important. It's not to provide justification for heinous crimes and acts of terrorism, but it's to understand that it's a very complex world, and we have to understand its history and culture before we talk about it.
Okay, and we have like a minute and a half. You have a Facebook comment there.
Yeah, so I told people today we'd be talking about what it's like to be Muslim in Montana. And we got a question from Rick. He says, that is awesome. Please ask them what it is like to be a Christian, a woman, or a homosexual in the Middle East in comparison to being a Muslim in Montana.
Okay, so...
Well, as I am neither a woman nor a homosexual nor... what is the other category?
Muslim.
A Muslim a Christian in the Middle East. I can only speak from my experience as someone who's visited the Middle East extensively. I've been to 8 different Arab countries for many months, all in total a couple of years. And I can say, having been to Palestine, where Christians and Muslims, they protect each other when they pray. I've lived in Lebanon. Christian and Muslim students live together, and women go walk around in the streets. And there's no burqa, there's no niqab, the kind of things we hear about in other countries. But it's true that there's a lot of great diversity, between conservative Muslims and more Western-looking Muslims all across the Arab world and across the Islamic world. So if this question is intended to say that in Saudi Arabia, Christians can't practice freely, or women can't drive their car, or gays are stoned to death. You know, in some cases, yeah, that's true. In Saudi Arabia in particular, this is a very, very conservative country.
Okay, and with that, we need to take our hard break here. And Catherine, I apologize for this. We're going to ask you to hang on until the top of the hour. You'll be first in the queue. 721-1290 is our number. Talkback will continue in just a few minutes. And Ponderosa Dental. Okay, we continue our discussion now. Dr. Mirdad Kia joining us in studio, University of Montana professor of history, Jamil Chaudhry, who is a University of Montana architect, and Brendan Work, who is an Arabic instructor at our local high school. So we promised Catherine that she'd been waiting the longest, so let's strap on our headphones, gentlemen, and get right to the phone. Catherine, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I was just thinking about what I think is a major factor in the rise of ISIS and all of those other various and sundry cults. I think of them as cults. And they seem to offer a simple explanation of the world for those who are confused and threatened by the increasing complexity offered both materially, spiritually, socially, and culturally. And so for many people, well, for some people, it's because they like to gain power. It gives them pleasure to seek power over other people. So that's one of the twofold reasons. But the other one is it's easier to live and function if you're given a specific structure in which to nest, and then you don't have to make as many decisions. So it's easier to be, and therefore seductive, to be told what to do and when to do it. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd say I agree with you.
Okay. Well,
Very simply.
She's still on, so leave your headphones on.
First of all, Catherine,
okay.
Hello, how are you? Good to hear from you.
Good. Yeah, nice.
And
Nice
thank
to
you
talk
so
to you.
much for your comment. I think that you're absolutely correct that being a member of ISIS puts you in a position where you're always right and you have God on your side. And no matter, how much you do that, if you weren't in ISIS, you would have to ask forgiveness for.
In other words, you're a true believer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you commit crimes and when you, become, you act savagely against the rest of humankind, you don't have to ask for forgiveness, and you don't have to contemplate your existence. You don't have to, say sorry. And that's a very seductive kind of life. I think you're totally right about that. And that, must appeal to people who are sick of whatever is going on in their lives. And, it's a sad fact, but that is a big recruiting factor for ISIS.
Now, Jamil, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I've seen and from what I've read and followed on this whole particular conversation, it seems to me that ISIS's chief recruits are the younger, vulnerable people. These are folks, by and large, who don't even know their own religion, Islam.
Well, they're looking.
She's talking. Yeah. I'm sorry.
If you kind of take a look at their recruits, most of these guys have committed lots of petty crimes in their youth. They have been in and out of prison. They've been miscreants. They've not really been true Islamic followers. They've maybe been born into an Islamic family, but they really don't know Islam.
In many
itself.
cases, they have even bought books saying Islam for Dummies or what is Islam immediately prior to.
So these are a group of people who are recruited not so much for their faith, it's for the other talents that they have, being in and out of prison, doing crimes, doing this and that. So they have known the world, so to speak. They can do things without feeling bad about it. So they get recruited, they get brainwashed, and now they're told suddenly, okay, you're fighting for God, you're fighting for your faith. These are folks who don't even know what their faith is, where the faith says the biggest crime you can ever commit is to kill a fellow Muslim. This is the biggest crime. In the Quran it is written, this is the biggest crime you can ever commit, to kill a fellow Muslim. And what do ISIS members do? They're killing fellow Muslims.
What they do is they redefine people, both Christian, Muslim, and Yazidi and whatever, as non-Muslim because
Correct.
they don't follow the 7th century.
Yes. Yes. So that's how they're justifying it.
Okay. Thanks,
the ISIS leaders are justifying it to their followers by demonizing the other. It's us against them, and them is even the other Muslims, and they are saying that those other Muslims are your enemy because they are not true believers. They are followers of the U.S. They are communists. They're whatever, but they are non-Muslims because they're fighting us as ISIS. They are therefore non-Muslims. They are not with us, And it's the same with the Shias. The Shias are labeled as kafir, as non-Muslims, they're non-believers. Christians also the same, Yazidis the same. It's a way of justifying to their fellow followers that, this is the only way that we can behave and we can function in this world is by saying it's us against them. And as soon as you say it's them, it's okay to kill them. It's okay to torture them. It's okay to take away their rights.
You dehumanize them.
You dehumanize them, and therefore you make it easier for your own followers to do criminal acts, including murder, against the others without any feeling.
Sure. Go ahead.
And Catherine is completely correct, and what a great question, and what a great analysis, by the way. And thank you for your comment, Catherine. I think one issue that has come to me, in studying this terrorist cult, and it is a cult, really. It's a death cult. It's a nihilistic cult. Is that a large segment of the recruitment takes place in jails. And as Jamil was saying, these are petty criminals. France, for example, has a huge population of young Muslims who are in jail for petty crimes. And ISIS has chosen the French jail system as one of the places where they recruit. These guys have never read anything Islamic. They don't even know about Islam and its teachings, but they are ready to go and find meaning in something in their life, which is pretty meaningless, right? And the two Algerian fellows who attacked Charlie Hebdo, the two terrorists, basically, they were losing jobs left and right. They were in drugs. They were getting into trouble and getting into jail. And then suddenly they find meaning in going and waging war against humanity. And that humanity can be anything at any given time. It can be Jews, Christians, Muslims, Yazidis, women, men, or it can be a particular government that ISIS directs them against. So to understand the psychology of these guys, I think, are essential. But it's a death cult, and it has to be suppressed, and it has to be destroyed, because it poses threat to peace and stability in the world.
Okay, we're up against a break. We're going to come right back. James is up next on the phone. I promise, James, as soon as we come back from the break, you'll be first in the queue. 721-1290. We have 3 lines open at our Facebook page, and our guests are here with us until 10 o'clock this morning, so feel free. And we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. John King. I'm Peter Christian. Joining us here in studio is Dr. Mirdad Kia from the University of Montana History Department. Jamil Chaudhry, the architect at the University of Montana. And Brendan Work, who teaches Arabic at our local schools. And I promised James he'd be up first. James, thank you for your patience, sir. Go ahead.
Hey, no problem. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying not to take too much time. You guys are having such an excellent conversation. I have all these questions and thoughts. So I have 2 questions I want to ask and then 1 point to make. The point I wanted to make is, I'm seeing a parallel here in the United States, it seems like, that is ironically similar to early Mormon history, because they were persecuted and there were people doing things that were wrong in the religion, but it wasn't them. And that's even the case today, where there's offshoots of the religion that are practicing things that are illegal, like polygamy. And the mainstream Mormon church is constantly trying to prove who they really are, that they're actually Christian, that they're not polygamists, and all of this because of these offshoot groups, which to me, I view ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all these groups kind of the same way, even though I don't know a whole lot about the Arabic religion. I can empathize with that kind of persecution. I'm LDS myself, so there's a history there that I relate to.
So what are your questions, James?
My question, I have 2. One is there, I'm sure there is, but do you guys make an effort to share the parts of the Quran and the religion itself that do promote peace and say, hey, this is who we really are? Because unfortunately, we don't get to hear that with the media. We hear the opposite of that. Just like we could take violence from the Bible and say, oh, this is what God prescribed, even though it isn't. my other question is, given the dishonesty and the divisiveness of the election right now, and I'm sorry, both candidates are just sad. What is your guys' opinion on the election? Who are you going to vote? Who are you going to vote for? If I can ask that.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your call, James. All right, guys. So Jamil, go ahead. You wanted to tackle that one. Go ahead,
Yep,
sir.
I'll go ahead and tackle that, James. That was actually quite an excellent observation. I mean, in my office, I do have a couple of LDS folks, so we frequently do talk faith and stuff. And it is in a way very good to remind this country of what the LDS faith went through. Starting from when John Smith started the whole movement in upstate New York. And then went over with his followers to Missouri area, if I'm not mistaken. But the local Christians there felt that this whole group was a severe threat. They were particularly harassed and kicked out of there. Went north, I think, into Illinois, and were equally harassed and kicked out of there. And that started the whole across the desert movement.
And here's a lake.
migration.
Here's a lake that nobody wants.
Yeah, here's a lake, and here's a whole area that nobody wants.
yeah.
By the way, there are the Ute Indians there, but that's kind of how the West was won, right? But so here's a whole faith that's been kind of demonized and ostracized, even though they claim Jesus Christ as their savior. But it's a different kind of a faith from the traditional Catholic Protestant movement. And so I guess the traditional Christians felt very, very threatened by this new faith. So here's a whole group of people who are white American Christian, so to speak, who have been, persecuted. And so, we as Muslims kind of feel, okay, we're the modern day Mormons, right? I mean, due to actors who have kind of gotten the ire of the American population. Now it's like the whole mass of the Muslim Americans are being paid to pay for those few people's crimes, So,
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, James, for that excellent historical parallel. I think that's totally right, that often what we would say moderate Muslims, that term in itself kind of implies, that the default is not moderate. They're often asked to either apologize for or explain the actions of immoderate Muslims. And I think that that's happened in Mormon history as well. You have to find a moderate Mormon to apologize or explain for the polygamists. And that's just silly. Like, if you have a busy life, you don't have to tell everybody, well, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a terrorist. If you're a moderate person, that's the default. You don't have to explain that. I think that's a great parallel, so thank you.
Keeping with the parallel of Mormonism and Islam, a very controversial play, the Book of Mormon, came out not too long ago. It was drawn up by the guys that do South Park, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. I believe I got the names right. And everybody was kind of looking for what was going to happen. What was the Mormon Church going to do? And they bought an ad in the playbill. If you want to learn more about Mormonism, go here. And they this is a way. Now, I'm using this as a parallel because one of the disturbing things that we have noticed recently, whether it's the Charlie Hebdo shootings or the attacks in Texas, is that when Mormonism is criticized or made fun of in a public sphere sort of way, it often results in death and tragedy. And that interplay between the religion and the public sphere is often very, very dangerous. And so, although the relationship between Mormons and the United States and liberties is one thing, we don't feel comfortable oftentimes having the same liberties of expression between each other in conversation with the Mormon community in the United States, or frankly anywhere. And I think that's probably a big part of the reason why. Can you explain how? Is there a path away from this? Is there a path for a liberal tradition which embraces the freedom of speech and the ability to cartoon whatever you want to cartoon, and the Mormon faith?
Okay, we're going to take a break. 721-1290.
Muslim faith.
Give everybody a chance to formulate their thoughts, and we'll do that. We also have 4 lines open. We'd love to hear from you folks. 721-1290 is our number. We're coming right back. Back on Talkback, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. All right, let's continue. Now, Brendan, you wanted to respond to what James had said and some of the other things, so you were just grabbing your notebook, so go ahead.
I was hoping there would be a question about a Western liberal interpretation of Islam. And, Islam as a religion of God, can be taken in any number of directions. We know where ISIS has taken it, and I want to move away from that as quickly as possible because that's what gets so much play on, various media outlets. But, there are readings of the Quran, that are feminist. There are readings of the Quran where democracy is enshrined as, the proper rule. There are readings of the Quran which don't condemn homosexuality. There are gay Muslims, there are feminist Muslims, there are Western American liberal Muslims, and they have their own ways of interpreting the religion of Islam, whether it's the Quran or the traditions of the Prophet or legal rulings. There is no one Islam. I mentioned earlier that somebody I met had a book called Sharia. Sharia is an impossibly broad topic that people spend literally decades researching. They get doctorates in Sharia. You can't put it in a book that's 150 pages long. And if you are a Sharia scholar that has a Western liberal interpretation, if that's the tradition you were raised in, there are many beautiful ways of looking at the revelations of God in the Quran that have to do with homosexuality and women's rights, equal rights, democracy, these kind of things that we consider Western liberal values.
So in America, there is a different tenor that the country takes towards Islam than it does towards other religions. For example, the same people that wrote the Book of Mormon Act, Trey Parker, Matt Stone, they also had episodes of South Park that included pictures of Muhammad. That picture was blocked out. It was not allowed to show on our television by our networks in the United States. Now, I come at this as personally, I'm a Christian, and in my tradition of Christianity, we forbid the creation of idols, especially anything that you would say would be God. So we don't have nativity scenes. I don't let my kids draw Jesus or God. We talk about that as we forbid it because we don't want to make God anything other than he actually is and make him less than what he really is. And so I guess I can sympathize with the Islamic tradition of not wanting God to be drawn, but the fervor and the danger of drawing God in the Islamic tradition in Western society has made even our national, which NBC and ABC and CBS, they'll put anything up there. I mean, they talk about sex and drugs and rock and roll all day, but when it comes to a picture of Muhammad, they wouldn't play it. It's changed our culture.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. First and foremost, building on what Brendan mentioned correctly, Islam historically was born in a state of war. That is, Muhammad as the messenger of Islam had to fight to protect his community, the small Muslim community. So naturally and unavoidably, there are many revelations regarding warfare and violence in the text, which means the Quran. And I think to transpose those revelations in the Quran, or those surahs as they call them, into the modern period is quite a jump for a lot of Muslims. But Muslim fundamentalists do that. They go back to the text and they pick those statements about warfare, which of course Muhammad had to fight in order to protect and survive, and then apply it, let's say, to attacking United States. There is no mention of United States or the need to attack United States or the West, because United States and the West did not exist at the time, and Muhammad had no idea about, having a plan to attack other civilizations or countries. That's one. The second thing is, I think it's the first thing we have to avoid is to equate Muhammad with Jesus. Jesus is central to Christianity, has a divine presence and being. Muhammad was completely a man, an earthly man. He was not here. He was born. He was raised. He preached. And he died, and he is not supposed to come back. He was not the Son of God. The equivalent of Jesus in Islam is the text, the Quran, whereas holiness appears in Christianity in the shape of a man. In Islam, it appears in shape of the Word. Muhammad, in fact, is told in the Quran that he's faulty, that he's imperfect, that he has made mistakes. And Muslims have to readily accept that because he was an earthly human being as any other earthly human being. We make tremendous number of mistakes throughout our lives. This notion that he should not be portrayed has nothing to do with his divine nature. It has to do with something else. In Islam, it is taught that worshipping Muhammad, creating a portrait of Muhammad, diverts the attention of a Muslim from worshipping God. And therefore, there was magnificent portraits of Muhammad made, very handsome, and they were all discarded because that diverts the attention of an average Muslim from worshipping God, which is the object of worship, to an earthly human being who was faulty and incomplete and imperfect. That's why the whole issue of not portraying it comes in. Jamil, you want to
So I would just like to follow on from that. You have to remember that Islam was pretty much created around 600 AD, 600 years after the birth of Christ. So historically, if you take a look, what was happening in the Christian world around that time, the fact that Jesus Christ was almost being worshipped as a God. I mean, the Trinity, you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? I mean, the Son is being worshipped almost on a par level with God.
And the Nicene Creed affirms that he is God.
Yes.
So he is on the same level as God.
On the same level, but yet he was born to a woman, a earthly woman, and he lived his life here as an earthly human being. So in Christianity, you see Jesus who's been elevated to the same equal status as God. And in Islam, we are at great pains to make that distinction that there is only one God. In the Quran, it is written numerous times. I mean, it's a series of chapters. And almost every chapter, starting from beginning to the end, it comes back to that point repeatedly. Remember, there is only one God. Worship only one God. And so Islam, it takes great pains to not divert that attention away from that monotheistic one God, which is a spiritual God. You cannot see him. And so any kind of portrayal of Muhammad, even coming close to that level, is totally shunned and stopped immediately. And so this whole concept of trying to draw images of him or make idols of him was always seen as a threat, that we would then follow the Christian movement where you have pictures and statues, images, then that you use them to worship. And so this is highly shunned and very much fought against. And you see to that extent that, you do not want even a picture of Muhammad, lest someone somewhere take that and start worshiping Muhammad over the true God.
Of course, as a Christian, we wouldn't say that Jesus was raised to be God. He lowered himself to experience being a man, and to save humanity. But the conflict here we still haven't addressed. I have an explanation for why Muslims are outraged at drawing Allah or drawing Muhammad, but I still have yet to hear an argument of a path forward for a liberal West that wants the freedom to be able to draw and criticize religion, and a Muslim community that won't abide it.
Okay, we're going to take a break, talk about it when we come back. We have Rich on the line who wants to visit with us. We have 3 lines open, 721-1290. We'll be right back. And we're back on Talkback, and we're going to continue with our conversation. Rich, I'll get your phone call here in a moment. But Brendan, you wanted to address something that was talked about just a minute ago.
Right. So your question about portraying the prophet in a free society, right, I think is a very, very important one because it gets at what the soul of a good religion should be. And there's a fantastic verse in the Quran. I wasn't going to get out of here without speaking some Arabic. It says, La ikraha fid din, which is there is no compulsion in religion. And that basically says, if somebody's forcing you to give charity to the poor person on the street, it doesn't come from your heart. It comes from the state. It comes from, force. So if Islam is going to flourish, it's only going to flourish in a secular society where nobody's telling you to do good. You have to do good on your own. And so I think if America, is a truly democratic and secular society where any religion can, flourish and be itself, then that's the place where Islam is going to be the most Islamic. That might freak some people out by saying America is going to be Islamic. I'm not saying that. I think that America is the perfect place for a religion like Islam to flourish because it doesn't tell people what to do.
Well, we supposedly have freedom of religion built into our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. So,
And historically, Jews and Christians were referred to as Ahlul Kitab, which means the people of the book. And they had a legitimate religion, and they had a legitimate prophet, and they had a legitimate holy book. And the commandment on that in Islam, from what I understand, is that Muslims have no right to prevent and violate the rights of Jews and Christians as fellow followers of people of the book. And let us remember that in the Quran, Abraham is mentioned more than any other male person. And the only woman who is mentioned in the entire text is Mary. So there is an enormous amount of respect for the teachings of Judaism and Christianity. Now, I know your listeners think about, wow, that's a very different Islam. But we tend to forget that when Inquisition, for example, was reaping havoc in Andalusia or Spain, and Jews were persecuted, the first place they fled to was the Islamic world. Tens of thousands of Jews came to Ottoman Empire as a result of this and sought the protection of the Ottoman government. Now, that was not the Ottoman government which went to war in First World War, corrupt and decayed, but it was the Ottoman Empire at the height of its power. And throughout the reign of these dynasties, Islamic dynasties, whether it's Ottoman Empire or the Safavid Empire in Persia or the Mughal Empire in India, there is a high level of tolerance for religious diversity. But today we are speaking about a form of Islam which is intolerant, which is cruel, which is brutal. And part of that, and this is how we started, is perpetuated by a certain interpretation of Islam. And that certain interpretation of Islam either has its home in Saudi Arabia or in Iran at this point. Shia Islam has its backer in Iran, and Wahhabi fundamentalist Islam has its home and support in Saudi Arabia. This is what Islam has to fight with. The fight is over the soul of Islam, and to liberate itself from these state sponsors who have actually their own foreign policy agenda and their own aggressive sort of platform to perpetuate a form of Islam to justify their own existence and to expand their influence.
okay, we got to get one more. Got to get a call in here. Rich has been waiting very patiently. Thank you, sir. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, just really quick. I just wanted to say two things. One is I wanted to commend you guys for having this educational process on the radio. It's awesome because, as we will all agree, I think the media in America sometimes doesn't give us the full picture. That's my first comment. My second comment.
One of the reasons, Rich, is because the media, as we like to call it, is very one-dimensional. In that sound bites are 30 seconds. If it lasts more than 30 seconds, we can't keep people's attention, so we're going to keep it simple, stupid, and move on to the next, broad idea. So go ahead. What's your second point?
So thanks to you guys for doing this. My second point is, I've traveled to Indonesia twice for a total of 4 months, 2 months with my brother and then 2 months with my wife, years ago in the 90s. It was a very peaceful and pleasant trip both times. You're surrounded by many, many people. It's very populated, and of course many Islamic folks. And you hear the call to prayer all the time. And that was my main comment. I just wanted to say it was a very peaceful, pleasant trips. 2 trips that I took, and the people were very kind. And they obviously knew that I wasn't Muslim, but that didn't matter. You'd be in the middle of a conversation. It was called a prayer in the middle of the day, maybe, and and they would just grab their mat and be gone for a little bit, and then they'd be back and pick up your conversation where you were. But they were very pleasant and peaceful people, as far as I could tell, in pretty much the whole country, and there's many islands there.
Yeah.
Subcultures.
Thank you, Rich. This is Brendan.
Thanks for the call.
Echo your sentiment and your experience. I'm not a Muslim. I've studied Arabic and Islam for about 11 years now, and my experience is your experience, having traveled in the Middle East and had that kind of that love and generosity. And if they're going to kill you, they're going to fill you with food.
The other thing, thank you, Rich, for your excellent comment and question. I appreciate it. One other issue, I think, going back to the issue of the media, I think the media has to educate itself about issues such as this one. I quite often have to listen to, the popular media, especially TV media, and part of our teaching involves, talking about how Islam is portrayed in the West. And I am just amazed by the level of ignorance in the popular media, in the U.S. media. And it, by the way, sorry to kind of hurt the feelings, but we are politically incorrect. It doesn't have to be conservative or liberal or moderate. The ignorance is quite widespread.
It's
among
endemic,
all,
yeah.
It's endemic at all corners, in all corners. And what it is, it's sometimes, on the liberal side, maybe there is a tendency to say, Islam is a religion of peace. And then on the other side, it's Islam is a religion of war. Islam is neither a religion of peace nor religious of war. Islam is a religion. And it is made either violent or peaceful by individuals and their interpretations of it. But one thing I also want to sort of emphasize, and that is an extremely important issue that Rich brought it up, is that the diversity of this Islamic world is quite overwhelming even for the Muslims. So for media which claims to be our ears and eyes, portraying the reality, it's quite disturbing to see how ignorant they are. The comments, for example, I heard it actually on MSNBC, very liberal. It was Muslims worship toward Mecca because that's where Muhammad was born. Oh my God, that would be a heretical act by the Muslims. They worship toward Mecca because of the Kaaba, the holy shrine. It has nothing to do with Muhammad. But these kinds of statements are made on a daily basis. And as far as someone who knows a little bit about these issues, you cringe when you hear these misrepresentations.
Okay, we're up against a break, and we're going to come right back. And all four lines are open now if you want to get through. 721-1290. We're talking with Jamil and Brendan, of course, Dr. Mirdad Kia, John King, and Peter Christian, and a cast of thousands. We'll be right back. This is Talk Back, and we're rolling right along. All right, 721-1290 is our number, and we have some Facebook comments that have been waiting a long time. Jim.
Yeah, let's start with Elena. Elena wants to know, what is the literal translation of Islam?
Islam means submission to the will of God.
Bill wants to know, what has Islam contributed to the world?
There was a 400-year period from 800 to about 1258 when Islamic countries were the tippy top of the world in terms of contribution to mathematics, astronomy, science. That seems to have been a long time ago. Most recently, most of the Nobel winners of the last 5 years have been Muslims.
Well,
And just as a clue, look under the word algebra, al-Jabar, restoration. That has its own origins in Arabic.
you tell me algebra is connected. That doesn't lift my spirits. I'm a
Right,
English
a lot of
language
people
guy, but I'm sure there's great contributions. Algebra, I'm not so sure. We got to, before Brendan leaves, and Brendan has to leave here in a second, not because the fire's getting too hot, but he's working. Brendan says, Christina says, Brendan taught both of my kids at Big Sky. Now that they are off at college, they are much more understanding that people are people everywhere you go. We all have the same needs for food, shelter, security. You shouldn't define a people by the radicals. I love that these men are here to help us learn about broader perspectives. My daughter is an Arabic major spending this year in Morocco.
Wow.
And it is because of her and her teachers that I have learned to not automatically distrust anyone from Muslim or Middle Eastern background.
He's close to tears.
Yeah,
over
well,
here,
now I gotta
gotta
go
say.
because I'm crying.
That's great.
There you go.
That's every teacher's dream, isn't it, Brendan? You bet, absolutely.
Tim says, as a retired Army colonel, I served in 4 war zones, a total of 30 months, all with Muslims. I was shot at in 2 of them. I have my opinions of the Muslim people and the religion. Europe is ready for a caliphate. I think that Europe or the U.S. should not accept any military-aged males and swear off polygamy to be accepted here.
As a question about...
I don't know. It's just kind of his stance.
Yeah,
I mean, what do you think? And honestly, Tim is not alone. Donald Trump was pretty famous, saying he's changed it to severe vetting, but originally it was a Muslim ban. It's kind of morphed over the months, but I guess my question is, how do you deal with that kind of perspective? I mean, do you have a alternative solution, or?
First and foremost, you do not draw red lines in the sand saying that we will do such a thing in Syria, and then when Syria goes into pieces, then we sort of step back. I think the issue is very serious. I think vetting applicants is essential for the security of the United States. I don't know of any Muslim colleague or friend who is actually against vetting and security check. This is essential for the security of the United States. Muslims themselves have to stand up for security and the rule of law, and therefore I don't have any problem with that. But creating a caliphate in Europe, I think that's a little bit going beyond the sort of the framework that we are working with. Europe is suffering because such a large number of refugees, some of them being penetrated by ISIS, arrived on the shores of Europe without really correct vetting. And that has been a very negative process. And the result is, of course, acts of terrorism and violence. We should be very careful in terms of who we admit to this country, whether they come from Islamic countries or non-Islamic countries. I would apply that to the entire globe rather than to just one part of it.
Okay. Now, one more quick question before we have to take another break. I'm sorry. Kathy's question from earlier, why aren't Arabic countries taking refugees, or are they?
Oh, they are. They're taking most of the refugees from the Syrian conflict in particular. So Lebanon, which borders Syria, is a very, very small country. You could fit about 50 Lebanons in Montana. That's taken, I think, about 2 million Syrian refugees. Jordan, the one to the south of Syria, is taking quite a few. And then, of course, Iraq, which is already in its own war, has taken many Syrian refugees. When you're fleeing to Iraq, you've got a problem. Okay. So those countries have accepted many, many millions. Right.
Okay. I think Catherine's question is very good in the sense that the rich Arab countries, such as Saudi Arabia, need to do much more. And they are sitting on the sideline. They have a finger in this conflict. They have been backing ISIS, and they are not doing their job. They are not taking as many refugees as the poorer countries in the region, such as Lebanon and Jordan.
Okay, we're going to take a 1-minute break. Come right back. We have Judy, Marilyn, and Kathy, and we'll try to get as many calls in as we can in the next 8 minutes. So we'll be right back. And we are back on Talk Back. I'm going to kind of redeem as much time as we can here. As Brendan has to get to work, he teaches, for crying out loud. Jamil Chaudhry, the building won't fall down. He's an architect. He's built a good foundation. So let's get to the phone first of all and say good morning to Judy. Judy, you're on with our guests. What's your question?
Hi. I have a question about Islam and the countries that are dominated by Islamic rulers. I've been to many Middle Eastern countries. I worked in Iraq. I just got back from Israel, and I've read a lot about it. But my question is, why are the Arab countries mostly all basically, there's a huge disparity of wealth. There's a lot of corruption, and there's a lot of environmental degradation. I mean, huge amounts of garbage in the Mediterranean Sea, in all of the major rivers, piles of garbage everywhere in Egypt. And the other question is, why are women so oppressed? I mean, many, many, many women, especially in Egypt, are sexually assaulted. And I experienced this working in Iraq. Even the women that are not, out there being maybe sexually assaulted, they are definitely, there's a sense of oppression. There's not a sense of freedom for women.
Okay, let's let him answer that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Judy. That was a really excellent question and perspective, and I'd love to hear about your experience in Iraq. You are totally right that the environmental degradation is a problem in most of the Middle East, and that, to me, has to do with authoritarian regimes. The environment is a very low priority for...
There's no infrastructure, right?
Right, and what they want to do is produce as much of their natural resources as possible, which in their case is oil, which contributes to the pollution in the Gulf and the air pollution and, everything else you're talking about. So if there were more democratic systems of governance in the Middle East, not imposed by force, but grown up organically, which we can talk about for hours, that I think would contribute to a better environmental system. About the oppression of women, again, you're absolutely correct. In Egypt, sexual harassment is about 99%. That's something that I've come in contact with myself. Not sexual harassment, I meant the statistic. But you're totally right about that. And to fix that problem, I think this is a problem of education. It's a long-term solution that has to do with better investment in education, has to do with, like we talked about, more liberal interpretations of the Quran and the Hadith, and it's going to have to be fixed from the ground up. But there are reformers who can do it. There are feminist Muslims who are out there, and we need to give them their support. So
go ahead, Jamil.
Yeah, Judy, I'd just like to follow up on that.
Here.
And,
Yeah,
I would say that environmental degradation is pretty much a problem throughout the developing country and the third world. I mean, I was born and raised in Africa. I've seen how that's what kind of degradation that's going through. I've visited India, and China is always in the news about its environmental problems. So it's pretty much a worldwide issue, especially in the emerging countries, the developing countries, the third world countries, where resources are limited and they are trying desperately to cope with their expanding populations. Don't discount that fact by itself. Population growth in those countries is huge. They are growing at a rate that the governments cannot maintain or provide for their own population.
It's unsustainable.
It's
right?
unsustainable.
Right.
Their growth rate is unsustainable. So Kenya, which I'm very familiar with, when I left 30 years ago, was about 22 million. And now it's 40 to 44 million. I mean, all in the same land with the same resources.
Sure.
Water is a huge issue. You cannot even drink the drinking water coming straight out of the tap. You have to buy bottled water. Garbage everywhere. I mean, the resources are stretched so thin that you cannot provide. So it is just not an Arab country issue. It is a much broader worldwide issue, one of environmental degradation.
And from thence, all the problems that you're suggesting that foments unrest, especially with the younger
foments
population.
Unrest because of unemployment, bad water, bad sanitation, lack of housing, but it's the lack of jobs which is the critical one. But following on about the women, I mean, when I was raised in this Islamic world, it was the women were held in high esteem. In the Quran, it is written, Jannat, heaven is under the foot of your mother. Your mother, women are held in such high esteem that you have to really treat them with utmost respect and honor. And that is the part of Islamic teaching that I think has kind of disappeared over the years.
Well, it must break your heart then to hear.
It does.
To see some
It
of
does.
these
In the
things.
early
Yeah.
80s, 90s, I think things were a much better footing. All of these countries were newly independent, emerging. There was nationalism that was being talked about. They had just gotten out of colonial kind of an era, had gotten rid of their Western masters. They were talking about self-independence, about their own future, about creating jobs, education, a good society.
We're almost out of time.
Okay.
We have 1 minute, Mirdad. Go ahead.
No, I think all of these points are excellent. The fact of the matter, Jamil just alluded to this, the majority of Islamic countries, especially in this case Arab countries, they were artificially created by the British, the French, or some colonial master. And when the colonial master left, most of the time, they were replaced not by democratic orders, but by authoritarian militaristic orders. Most of them army officers seizing power in the name of the people. And in that context, you lack democracy. You have a heavily authoritarian regimes. They are not paying attention to issues of women's status, education, healthcare, environmental degradation. And as a result, this is what the Islamic world needs, a process of democratization and an intensification of education for the public.
And we're out of time. So thank you for joining us, all of you, and all of your calls. And so tomorrow we have Hunter's Breakfast, and I'm taking the day off.
And I have open phones. I have no idea what I'll be doing.
Have a great
without
day,
people.
everybody.